This is Chris, and this is the second video production journal for Paradise Square, which is a story or project or something that would be set in the Bowery or Five Points neighborhoods in mid-19th century New York. Now, I've always discouraged people from world building when they are coming up with the idea that they want to produce a narrative. There is a tendency amongst people, especially those who are fans of something with a really broad, well-built sort of fantasy universe. So some examples might be Star Wars or Harry Potter or Lord of the Rings. These are stories in which, yes, there's a central narrative, but there's also so much imaginative playground beyond that narrative that you feel wholly immersed in the world in which you are engaged while watching the story. And the problem that I think a lot of people face when they're crafting a story is that they build these worlds that they conceive of who would populate them, what the laws pertaining to them might be. Whether those be natural laws or social laws or whatever. And in doing so, it becomes increasingly difficult to center in on the narrative that might take place within this world. An artist or author can become really frustrated that there's so much that they've created that's never going to see the light of day because it doesn't fit in within the purview of the narrative. And so sometimes they'll try to shoehorn that in, leading to clunky, meandering stories, or more likely, those stories will never be created in the first place because it's so difficult to find a starting point, to center in and figure out what it wants to be. My suggestion to people has always been, and will likely continue to always be, figure out what you want your narrative to be and then build the parameters of the world around that narrative, creating the most conflict for the character and putting them in a situation where there's a lot to overcome. I'm not saying that world building isn't important. What I'm saying is that world building should not be the foundation. The world building should be the decoration. The foundation should be the narrative. Which is why I'm having problems with this particular story. There was a real explosion over the last couple of years in the floppy market. Comic book shops would have any number of monthly or semi-monthly series that were deviating wildly from what traditionally sold in serialized narrative. You'd have any number of genres, a lot of different idiosyncratic, creator-centric works. You have Rich Tomaso's Dark Corridor and Andrew MacLean's Headlopper. You've got Jason Aaron and Jason Latour's Southern Bastards. You've got all these great sort of very specific genre stories. And I got really excited about this. And as I'm almost the entirety of what I'm reading comics-wise these days comes out of this this market explosion. I'm reading fewer and fewer standalone graphic novels and more serialized narratives. And what you consume, generally speaking, tends to be what you want to put back out into the world. And that's the case here. So I was toying with the idea of doing a monthly series. And my non-history genre itch is scratched by working on the Creeps. And outside of that, I really want to be doing historical fiction. That's my first love. It's where I'm the most enthusiastic, and it's the one thing that is the least likely to tire me. Or that there's always stuff to be done with history, and so I get really excited about it the same way that some people get excited about kung fu or magic or what have you. And so I was trying to think of what would be a good project to tackle as a serialized narrative with no fixed endpoint, which is also a big departure from me. Anytime I've tackled a story in the past, I've always had a clear idea as to what I want the ending to be. Now, I usually have to arrive at that. I'm working on it and sculpting it until I figure out what it is. But that's an intrinsic part of just coming up with the general idea of the narrative, is where I want it to go, what I want it to contain, how long I want it to be, and where the ending is going to fall. And so in trying to envision a comic series, I was purposefully divorcing myself from that sentiment. I wanted to make sure that there was as much open-endedness in this potential narrative as there could be. And so I did what I always recommend other people not do, which is to focus on the world building, figure out all of these different characters and how their relationships might be to each other, but not necessarily have a fixed endpoint. Rather, treat it as more of a picaresque type of thing, episodic with characters potentially doing terrible things and nobody necessarily learning their lesson, or at least not to the point that they stop doing terrible things, because if they did, then it would cease to be the type of story that I was interested in telling. And so I figured out a few different, arcs for some of the characters that I thought worth pursuing. The first of these was a young bare knuckle boxer, and this stems from personal experience that I thought would potentially be a good narrative, but would be really boring were I to treat it autobiographically. And so that was one particular thing. Another would be a girl who is sort of indentured into the school that actually existed, which was sort of an academy for young ladies to be trained to street brawl so that they could be hired out as either union assists or strike breakers, depending on who paid more. And then another was a kid gang called the Baxter Street Dudes, who would, do all the illegal stuff that a kid gang might, in theory, do, but in order to make enough capital to produce a play, which they would perform in order to get that, sweet, sweet theater money. And so these were the stories that I thought the most interesting and that I would potentially interweave with a number of others. The River Pirates, the Hole in the Wall Saloon, and all this other stuff. So I reached out to my agent, Charlie Olson, and told him what I was thinking about this particular project. And he told me what has since been echoed by other folks in the publishing arena, which is that the floppy market that I've become so excited by and infatuated with, because it's just flooded with all these fantastic genre monthlies, is in fact flooded with all of these genre monthlies, and that it's become increasingly difficult for a book to make what I would need it to make in order to make a living. And that he recommended I rethink the project as a standalone graphic novel. Now, the difficulty with that is all of that world-building stuff. I approached this project from the standpoint of it being this wider sphere, and trying to narrow it down now has become very difficult and emotionally exhausting, because there are all of these elements that I thought worth giving story. And now I'm going to have to pick something. So, as I mentioned, I had those three specific lines that I thought would bear the most narrative fruit. And so I began to dwell on each of those and think which one would work best as the book. And though the boxer story was the one that was the most flushed out in my head in terms of where I thought it would go, I thought it would deal a little bit with the Astor Place riot and Captain Isaiah Renders and all. There was a lot of historical stuff that I thought I could pack in there, as well as a lot of good boxing stuff, and which I thought would be fun. But what I ended up trying to put my attention to was the theme of the story. Now, I should say right off that whatever I'm wanting the story to be about in the philosophical sense is secondary to the narrative itself. Whatever the story is about is not what the plot is not what the character movements are, things like that. That's where I put the majority of the entertainment attention, trying to make sure that the narrative is propulsive and engaging. But if I want it to say something, if I want it to mean something, then I also want it to be about something in the larger capital A about sense. And what I think can be best with historical fiction, and specifically with a period that I would like, as I mentioned, would like to see more readily engaged as a genre unto itself, is to use it to examine contemporary issues. So of these potential stories, one of them suits this end better than the others, at least in my mind. And that is the one involving the Baxter Street dudes. Now, what I'm thinking is that these kids will have grown up, their only real source of cultural narrative being the Bowery Theater. And what that theater produced more than just about anything else during this era were these shows involving a character named Big Mose, the Bowery Boy. And these kids just love Big Mose, and so what I think they will do is when they decide that they want to produce a play, they're going to produce a play about Big Mose. Now, this would be akin to kids today deciding they're going to do a play and it's going to be about Batman. And the creator and actor who plays Big Mose was a real historical figure, and I want to look up. I want to read as much about him, and especially if there are letters preserved or things like that, I want to get his thoughts on this, because New York at this time was going through a lot of flux, being the sort of the heart of both the publishing industry and also drama, and much of what happened in the rest of the country happened directly as a result of that, and they were undergoing a lot of changes to and debates of copyright law at the time. And so what I think will, in my mind, the general thing is that these kids will want to produce this play. The Big Moses creator will find out about it, tell them they can't, and has the muscle to back it up, because most everything at this time was, or at least in this area, was worked out, through punching and brickbats. So if they want to produce this play, they've got to do it in a way that almost ends up being kind of a caper. And so both the accumulation of capital and the production of the play would be treated structurally as a caper story. And so I think it could be really fun and interesting. There could be a lot of action, a lot of excitement, and a lot of twists and turns, and a lot of opportunities to examine the history of the period. But it would also offer a window to discuss the needs of copyright as it pertains to the protection of an artist and their artistic work, but also how that same copyright can be preventative in privatizing cultural heritage and making it to where younger creators, especially who grow up with a particular character and have an enthusiasm for telling stories with that particular character, are prevented from doing so because of the way that the law is structured. So my next step in this is that I'm going to start structuring this out and putting together a pitch. In my mind, I've got an idea for what my sample pages would be. Most of the time, a publisher, whether they're familiar with your work or not, is going to want to see sample pages. So I've got about a 5-page sequence, which right now would be the beginning of the book, which would showcase how these kids are con artists. It's going to be, they're fleecing somebody, and ideally doing so in a way that also showcases that they are, Robin Hood-esque. They're fleecing somebody who deserves it, and they're going to be using some of what they get to pay a person that the the mark has wronged. And so what I'm also going to be doing is putting together the outline for the story. And outlining is kind of tricky for me. I want to showcase that I have a clear idea as to what the ending is going to be, but really, the final story is going to differ from the outline, because as I'm working on the individual pages, the characters will start to come to life. They'll start to do things that might be different from what I expected them to do, and I want to allow that humanity to show through with them. So I always want to be a little bit vague in my outlines, but not so vague that it seems to the publisher that I don't know what I'm doing or where I'm going with the project. So that's what I'm going to be doing next, is putting together that outline and the pitch, which right now I'm also currently working on the fourth Krogan book, and I'm working on another project which also pertains to the 5 points but isn't the narrative, so it's sort of outside the sphere of this production journal, though I may touch on it down the road. So when I tackle it is not entirely certain. It may be this week, it may be 3 weeks from now, but I feel like I need to start working towards it because it's a project that I'd like to do sooner rather than later, and the quicker I get it in the works, the quicker that I might be able to do that. So that's where I am right now. And again, just to give you a better sense as to where my thought process is coming from, the types of decisions that I'm making. Just because you never know, it might benefit you or you might just be interested. So thank you so much for watching, and I'll keep you abreast of future developments.